of issues and special needs. So we'll try to fill in those gaps for you. And your experience?
I worked for 2 years in the special ed department at Irving Elementary.
Yep. And so that's an elementary school and probably an array of different special needs there. And
I'm Sarah, and I'm a mom of a special needs child. So again, I just have her experience, but
yeah.
would love to know more about
Yeah.
it.
Well, I think you sort of have to get a PhD in this to be a mom, right? That's how I see it.
Most qualified.
And you?
My name is Megan. I've worked here at Eagle Mountain for the last several years in a variety of different programs that I've been really lucky to see. Meet a ton of people, both participants and volunteers and parents.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. And Linda and I are going to talk a little bit about how this came about.
Let's finish introducing Sarah.
They're moms though.
Right,
Yeah,
so
so
they're gonna introduce themselves,
we'll
but also.
They're presenters. So yeah, they are here. They're both moms, and they're going to talk about their experience as well. Right after Linda and I talk about what happened. I want to start with just my own personal experience. I had a son who had a neurological disorder, and I just am very aware of the mother experience of that, the anxiety of that, the insecurity, the being judged by others because of the behaviors. I was living in the town of Dillon, and you can imagine. It was like, sleep deprivation, effect on the other children that I had. It's just very challenging. And then I was a clinician and worked with families with special needs. All my career I have worked with parents with special needs in one capacity or another, either through education or through the clinical work with family therapy or with the kids themselves. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You want to just say?
And so where I'm coming from, and I'll say more about this in a minute when I do my parent spiel, is that I have an adult child, and adults, parents of adults also need respite care, and so it's a wide spectrum. And so a number of years ago, I had a meltdown and ended up seeing Tina. So I'm one of those people that came her way, and she got me through it. Her help get me through it, and then when she was in the middle of trying to get this respite thing going, I don't know why she thought of me, but she did. And so I guess we worked on other things together with Eagle Mount here, we ended up helping to establish what's now called Saturday Night Out. But then it became kids night out, and now there's an adults night out. And so it's been growing. So so then we were working on it, and then about the same time, we were trying to figure out how to fund this, and I knew Heather Collins, who worked in the office, and she was responsible for fundraising for Eagle Mount. And so we talked to her about how do we do this, and then it ended up that Eagle Mount had revisited their mission and realized that they were not doing family support as much as they wanted to, and so they had gotten a grant, and so it all kind of came together that way. So that's why we're here. Yeah, is that the story? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess the only thing I didn't say is some of the other things is relationship stress, between parents, negative patterns that get developed in families, desperation for a break, how to do self-care, and the feelings of guilt around whatever.
All of it.
Yeah. Responsibility, because you're the mom. So I would like to invite, who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
I'm going to invite Sarah
I'll
out
sit
here.
with Sarah, and I'm Shauna Heiser, and Tina approached me about, she and I worked together for, do we have to do the math?
20 years.
20 years. And so she said, do you want to come and assist and talk about behaviors and what to pay attention to, what not, specifically in our respite population of our college kids or whomever. I think about the people that have worked with her son Asher, people who have worked with Evie, people that I know that have worked with Ty, you know, that they're not properly trained, and I know we're finding, I've done trainings here in this building at Eagle Mount where people feel like, I don't know what to do. When we have a kiddo on a horse that's having a meltdown, and the horse usually takes care of that, because they read the animal better maybe even than us, right, as instructors with them. So I told Tina I'm all in, and I was excited. I don't know if you want someone with you, but I'm happy to sit with you.
Oh, yeah,
We did this at the Methodist Church together, and so when Tina said, do you have a couple parents you could ask? I thought of Kat because of her work with SEPTA, and she's got a middle school age kiddo. She's got a young child, and I'll show you, I might click some pictures behind you as you're going, so you guys can kind of see the pre and post Asher. This is Kat's, these are Kat's kiddos, Aki and Evie, and Asher is Sarah's kiddo, and I'll show you the other little Asher that we struggle to help so much as well, and what that face can look like at times, because this is also Asher. He's our little guy, and Sarah, I'll let you take it from there. But I just want you to look at the differences, and I have one more like this. Yeah, and that's self-injury.
It's probably better if I stand, because I do get a little antsy. I'm not, a professional public speaker or anything like that. So thank you guys for bearing with me. And thank you, Shauna. With her and some other people at town, I've gotten to speak to different groups and speak at the college, and it's always like such a huge highlight for me, especially just being in a room with other people who are special needs moms and people who work with special needs kids. It's like a very comfortable space, so thank you. So I'm going to speak to you today about my son Asher and about our family and our challenges and our joys. I hope to give you a little bit of insight into raising a special needs family. Again, now that I know so many of you don't actually need that insight, but still, you know what I'm talking about. But just in any way that I can support other families or people who want to be respite care providers, or just friends, possible educators, and other community members. I'm Sarah Dean. I am a wife as well as a mom to Asher, my autistic son, and to Avery, my neurotypical 15-year-old daughter, and to Bill and Lucy, my dogs, my fur babies respectively. So first I want to tell you that I can only speak to and for myself and my own family. I cannot speak to having autism, and I cannot even speak to having a different child with autism. Our journey is very specifically raising a developmentally delayed child whose autism often acts as a disability in his life. And that is not true for all autistic people or families. The saying goes that if you have met one autistic person, you have met one autistic person. The spectrum is more like a giant color wheel than it is a line from less autistic to more. Some people diagnosed with autism face far less profound and practical life challenges than my son, and some face many more. But I believe that in sharing our journey, we can represent and speak to a broad range of challenges met by all kinds of special families. And especially, to help understand why families like ours would need maybe a list of people that we can call upon who are trained and prepared for our children. The hardest part of speaking about my son is walking the delicate line between demonizing autism and portraying a humanized, realistic picture of his difficult path. I want people to see him as a person, a complex and beautiful and valued boy, and I want people to choose empathy over pity. The focus of what I'm going to talk about is his challenges. Families like mine need help from their communities and their friends and their governments to thrive. But first, what I need you to understand the most is that while our struggle is great, nothing is greater than the love we have for our son. Nothing is greater than the joy that he brings us, the joy that I feel watching him make strides in communication, and understanding his world is raw and is indescribable for me. And the joy that he is capable of on his own is a true gift. And I also want you to know that there's nothing wrong with my son. I believe he is exactly as he is supposed to be. I choose to walk into each day believing that it is not my role to fix him, but to carve a path in front of him through an uncompassionate world. I want to decrease his suffering and his struggling, but I do not want to change who Asher is. In our worst moments and on our hardest days, I have thought I would want to see and hear and experience Asher without autism. But what I know in my heart is that is to say that I want a different child, and that's just not true. It's a reaction, and it is a human and flawed one because I am a human with flaws. So about Asher. Asher is 6.5 years old. He is a beautiful ginger-headed imp with a smile that will completely disarm you. He is mischievous, he is silly, he is energetic, and he is endlessly curious. He also has high needs nonverbal autism. High needs is preferable terminology for us and our family to the more frightening term of severe. Asher faces a heavy load of daily obstacles. He struggles to gain basic communication skills and currently has no verbal language and very limited alternative language. Asher has self-harming tendencies and aggressive behaviors, as well as sensory processing disorder. He may have an intellectual disability, but that's pretty tricky to establish with a child who cannot reliably communicate. He suffers from comorbid conditions like extreme food sensitivities and painful gastrointestinal problems. At Asher's most distressed, he can become violent and harmful to himself in a way that is torture for me to watch as his mother, and of course it must be twice as awful to experience for him. When he has punched himself in the face so hard that his eyes are black and blue and almost swollen shut, it is not easy to look at, as you can tell. It is not easy to see that, knowing how much it must hurt. When he hits over his bruises repeatedly and sometimes scratches the skin off of his face and his arms and his legs in a rage, I pretty much fall apart. It is hard to accept that in a meltdown, Asher cannot stop himself, and he often won't respond to our efforts to help. It is not bad behavior. Asher having an autistic meltdown is not like a neurotypical toddler in the toy store trying to manipulate you. Although he has the ability to do that too, like any other kid. Asher's autistic meltdowns are most often a reaction to uncontrollable stimuli, overwhelming emotion, pain, discomfort, and frustration. For me, the hardest thing is walking through Target, seeing the double takes at his wounded face and hearing the gasps. Knowing people think that I could have done that to my child. So in Asher's worst behavioral phases, we don't leave the house. And I do take a bit of solace, though, in the fact that Asher doesn't care at all what strangers think of him. Asher can also be aggressive towards us and other people. He has punched me in the face so hard that my glasses flew across the room. We have been headbutt, kicked, scratched, and bit when he feels so desperate and his little body doesn't know what else to do. Asher's not mean, and he's not bad. He's just hurting. He is repressed. He doesn't fully comprehend boundaries or consequences yet, even on the level of a neurotypical child of the same age. He doesn't yet have the benefit of healthy coping mechanisms that he understands how to use. The worst phase of his self-harm and aggression occurred around 1.5 years ago, and thankfully since then he has made great strides. We do not see self-harm on a daily basis now, and when we do, the intensity is probably 75% less. This change occurred first as a result of a change in his diet, which is how we figured out the extent of his GI problems, simply by removing gluten and dairy. He had seen doctors, and for years they couldn't tell us what was wrong. We talked endlessly to his team about what was driving his painful behaviors. But what we've discovered is that a lot of raising a child with nonverbal autism is throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, and that's what we did with the gluten and the dairy. I have felt for years that Asher's challenges were outside the comfort zone and the abilities of our local medical community. What I most often experienced in a doctor's office was a sense that they had no idea what they were looking at, that my son was an anomaly. However, in October of last year, we finally achieved a goal that we've been working on for a long time, of getting Asher to the Mayo Clinic for a comprehensive evaluation by the best doctors in the country. As a result of that visit, Asher is now on a medication regimen that has helped him tremendously with his worst behaviors, and we are incredibly grateful for the relief that he has now. Some days there are still bruises and tears, but what we are seeing mostly now is grins and giggles and spins and jumps, and Asher's happiest vocal stems. His favorite, happiest noise sounds a lot like Fonzie's "Hey" on repeat. So who doesn't like that, right? Just over and over again, it's the best. It's my favorite sound in the whole world. But around 2 years ago, I had to seek out help for anxiety, PTSD, and depression with a psychiatrist and a therapist as a result of the conditions inside our home. I was constantly bracing for violence and screaming and for his suffering. I was basically braced for impact 24 hours a day. Every night when I tried to sleep, if he had chosen to sleep that night, I found myself 10 years in the future, possibly being forced to put my son in an institution for his safety and for ours. I was hopeless that I could ensure my child a quality of life or keep him safe. And it was as low as I have ever felt. I mean, like you were saying, if you're a mom and you can't provide your child with happiness or quality of life or safety, you feel like, what is the point in even being alive? But today, after getting help, I do feel hopeful. And we've seen a lot of progress, like I said. I have plans for his future and for ours as a family, and that is how it works in our home. We go up and we go down, like any family does, but on a much steeper incline and decline. When we got Asher's official autism diagnosis, when he was 2.5, I can tell you that I was not particularly daunted. I felt relief. I felt like now we know what the challenge is and we can tackle it. And there were books to read and documentaries to watch and groups to join and appointments to make. So this mama bear was ready. But soon we realized that Asher is not your average bear, and he is not even your average autistic person. So a few years ago, I quit my full-time job as a salon manager because it was evident that there were no daycares in Bozeman equipped to handle his unique needs. Asher, at that time, around 2 years old, we had already started to see his behaviors change, and his development was lagging behind. It was obvious that I needed to devote myself entirely to his needs and his development and his well-being. So Asher did attend part-time special education class in the public school system for a while, but due to the severity of his challenges in 2019, he is not enrolled currently. The public school system was unfortunately unable or unwilling to give him what we felt like he needed to truly blossom, and we made the difficult decision to take a different path with him. He now receives around 30 hours a week of private therapy. So his Medicaid, and I'm sure this is going to be so redundant for all of you right now, but his Medicaid covers what I and the medical community consider a piddly amount of speech therapy and occupational therapy for a child with his profound delays. Or should I say that they did until about 1.5 years ago when Asher was unceremoniously kicked off of his state insurance because we own 2 cars. So that made us unqualified for help from the state, which they were gifts and we don't pay for them. They were just hand-me-downs, but still they were not swayed by that argument. But this is a whole drama that I won't go into, but it is indicative of a lot of problems that special needs families face in this state. We know and appreciate that Montana is a beautiful and clean and safe part of this country. We love our community here who have rallied behind us in what has been a very challenging few years for us. However, as citizens here, we need to understand that Montana falls in the bottom 5 of states as far as access to developmental disability services. Montana is the only state in the U.S. that will not educate a special needs child past the age of 18, which will most definitely be a need that my son has. Support that should be given for a kid like Asher in the United States is limited, financially inaccessible, and unreliable. There is limited access to the specialized medical care that he needs, like neurology and psychiatry. There are very, very few pediatric neurologists in this whole area. The one closest to us is in Billings, and our visit with him counts as the worst interaction with a medical professional that I've ever had in my life. There are no pediatric, psychiatric inpatient treatment facilities within 2 hours from us now. And as Asher grows and we face some of his hardest, most dangerous behaviors, we could need those services in the future if, in a few years he's going to hit puberty and everything, from what I understand, could change completely with his life and his needs. He'll be strong enough and big enough to pose a threat if we can't get him the consistent, intensive intervention that he needs. We're going to be facing a lot of hard decisions that I'm not super excited about. I have hope that we will continue finding peace for his mind and for his body, but being prepared for everything is how I am approaching this. Asher's team here is amazing, including the amazing Shauna Heiser here. Team Asher, as I call them, is made up of excellent, trusted professional therapists and teachers. Asher has been at Eagle Mount and taken ski lessons and swim lessons, and we've had an incredible experience with them as well. But Asher has a group of professional therapists who have all confirmed for me that the level of help that Asher will likely need as he grows is going to be near to impossible to receive here because of the state's current policies and the failure to fund the necessary programs adequately. In the short time since our diagnosis, we have seen Support programs and financial waivers disappear after being defunded by the state. The financial implications of all of this are severe for a family like mine. We are a family of 4 with a lot of unique needs. Just, Asher's not the only person in our family. And we live on a single modest income in an expensive town. We are not in a financial position to pay out of pocket for his treatments ever. The complications of dealing with the system here in Montana are too many and too intricate to fit into your day here. You only have one day. So it has been the greatest stressor of my life for years. And as a citizen of Montana, I try and beg people around me all the time to pay attention to who they vote for. It is the laws and the policies that affect us and the most vulnerable people here are changeable by our community. So I always tell people, please do not ask the already beleaguered and exhausted special needs families to be the only ones in the fight. How we treat the most vulnerable people in our community defines who we are. So when you consider that, when you think about the Montana policies that they've chosen, it doesn't shed a beautiful light on us, right? So from day to day, I can tell you that every single thing that we do as individuals or a family is affected by autism. Like sometimes Asher gets up at 3 a.m., and so we all get up at 3 a.m. Autism directly or indirectly affects the food we buy or can keep in our house, the pets we have, the amount of money or lack of money in our bank account, the resulting financial dependency on our family that is both humbling and humiliating, the furniture that we own, the places we can shop, when I can answer the phone, the music we can play, and where we need to live in the future. Asher's unique needs factor into each one of these. Right now, my family doesn't eat in restaurants and we don't go to movies. We don't, as a family, often go to other people's homes because we worry about breaking things, meltdowns, food allergies, you name it. My husband and I trade off, only one of us at a time going to our beautiful, gifted daughter's many performances because finding babysitting for a high-needs child is difficult. And who am I kidding? We can't afford it. Weekends are often a tandem parenting marathon of trying to keep him busy in appropriate ways for his level, and it is frantic. And I'll be honest, these weekends and so-called breaks, like school breaks for spring and summer, are my least favorite. What is a break for everyone else just means no school, no therapies, and no services. And often because of the eternal winter, we can't even play outside. Asher's routines during these times get thrown off, and that affects his mood, his sleep, his eating habits, and it can be a real mess. As I already alluded to, our high-stress lifestyle affects the mental and emotional state of everybody in our house, but I will only speak to mine. I am a fighter, and I, like I said, have sought help for my depression, but there are still low moments, and I have spent a lot of time asking, God or the universe or whoever's out there, why my little boy has to suffer, and how will we ever face so many challenges, so many obstacles for such an indefinite period of time, so much unknown. I can tell you right now that 49 out of 50 special needs moms are either in therapy, on medication, or both. There's no shame in that at all, but I think that the community around us should know that and should pay attention to the fact that it sometimes can get very dark. Moms are programmed to do everything in our power to give our kids their best life. What do we do when we can't or we don't even know what that's supposed to look like? What's most painful to me is the wedge that our lifestyle drives between our relationships, which you had mentioned at the beginning. Our teenage daughter is in a delicate and important phase of her life, and my heart breaks because I know she only gets a fraction of my energy and attention, because that's all that's left. I know that she loves her brother, but I also know that she hurts and she needs her mom more than she has me. Socially, our lifestyle isolates us almost entirely. Events and festivals, camping trips, and things like that are pretty much a no-go at this point in our family's journey. Parties, even kids' parties, become a nightmare when there is no food tailored to Asher's gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free diet. Other kids and adults don't understand the sounds he makes or the ways that he enjoys himself. Off in a corner, stimming all by himself, perfectly happy. Sometimes Asher gets very excited and he bops another kid in the head, and he's being goofy and affectionate, but it has turned more than one kid against him. And I know that hitting other kids is not okay, and we have worked on that, but he does it in a very joyful way. It's the only way I can describe it. So being around our friends, even the ones that are trying their very best for us, can be very hard. It's hard to talk about our kids or relate to their lives when ours is so profoundly different from theirs. Even within the autism community, Autism symptoms are so varied and opinions are so different that emotions can run very high. Conversations become hostile very quickly. And I have found that it is easiest to be alone in our home, protecting ourselves and our son. And marriage. My husband and I can laugh when we describe ourselves as respectful coworkers, just trying to show up on time and get the job done. But of course that stings. I don't remember the last time we ate a meal together alone or went on any kind of date. Last year we did get the opportunity to go away for a couple nights together in 2019 for the first time in years. And anybody observing us would have laughed at us, watching us try and figure out what to do with no restrictions, just the two of us. I mean, we were like, what happens now? We are tired, we are weighed down, and with a lot of heavy realities in a future that is devoid of certainty. We fight about money, we fight about loneliness, we do our dead level best to be the kind of parents that Asher needs, and everything else just sort of falls to the wayside. Speaking just personally, I am constantly baffled and feel like I'm behind the ball. The level of rigid consistency that Asher needs in his day, from his food, to his communication, to his potty training, it all rests on my shoulders like several tons of bricks. I often go to sleep each night feeling inadequate and like I failed him. My husband works all day, comes home tired to my pent-up frustrations. All because, this thing that we didn't anticipate just kind of fell in our laps. And because all of that is my responsibility, I'm going to continue to work on myself through authenticity and through sharing and through self-care. Despite the difficulty that we feel right now, we are still in the learning and adjustment phase. It's still really early. Autism is not the enemy, and Asher is not a problem that we need to solve. He is a light in this world. But what we don't yet understand about autism, what the research hasn't uncovered yet, the lack of resources and support available, these things do have consequences that matter to my family. But what we know, and we never say out loud, is that it probably isn't going to get easier. We have to get stronger and we have to ask for more help. Sometimes to get your life back, you have to face the death of what you thought your life would look like. That is a quote that I have on different surfaces in my house from a psychologist named Lisa Kirst. I like that because sometimes your expectations of the enemy, not autism, right? We as a family are climbing our way towards acceptance. We have to accept that what we thought our future would be is gone. It just is. I can't assume today that my son will be completely potty trained as a teenager. I can't assume that his school will provide him with everything he needs to thrive. I can't reasonably assume that we will ever be empty nesters. And I can't assume that he will be okay when I die. So we can't assume, but we can hope. We can hope for support and intervention and the love and the luck that it takes. I do genuinely feel blessed that in my role as Asher's mother, I am allowed to feel delight and glee over every tiny accomplishment that he has. We have dance parties and candy treats, and we sing songs for a hello wave, for eye contact, for a spontaneous sign language demand, my kingdom for a hug. I am gifted that I can let go of the comparison so common today in the mommy wars culture. My pride in my son stands alone outside of charts and graphs and data and wins and grades. It is so pure to love without parameters and without benchmarks, and I encourage everybody I know to try it. Before I'm done, I'd like to tell you about how I feel the community can better support and lift up families like ours. I see no lack of great intentions in people's hearts. I know there is a huge wellspring of love in this town and in this world for these amazing kids, as well as for their families. But we need advocacy and we need listening ears without judgment. We need a meal delivered sometimes after a long day when we've had to abandon the grocery cart during a meltdown. We need people to pay attention to the legislation that affects our children. We need churches to have resources for our kids so we're not excluded from faith. We need schools to get the funding they need. We need you to support local groups like Youth Dynamics and Family Outreach and this Rocky Mountain Respite that are trying to provide services and support in the Gallatin Valley. We had actually qualified for 20 hours a month of respite care through Family Outreach like a year or two ago, and which was really exciting until they told us they didn't have any respite care providers. So I was like, oh wow, well, thanks for that. Why would you even tell me that? So anyways, people who show up and try and participate in the community like this are my heroes. I do want to speak momentarily about the things we do as a community to rally around others in their dark times that are actually doing more harm than good. So for one, being careful around your words. The following things is a list of things that have been said to me or near me that are categorically unwelcome, hurtful, and rude, no matter what your intentions are. So these are things people have said about Asher. Quote, it's kind of like having a dog, since he can't really tell you what's going on. Quote, he looks normal. Quote, we dodged that bullet. This was a woman who emailed me, a stranger, who was referencing the fact that her child was vaccinated but not autistic. So, and for the record, my son is not a bullet that I failed to dodge. So, saying so-and-so looks or acts autistic as an insult, using the R word, obviously. That's weird how much I have to have that argument with adults. He'll talk when he wants to. No, he won't. That's not what's happening. He's not just not talking because he's stubborn. Quote, he will eat it when he is hungry enough. Also, no, he won't. I have a friend with a nephew who is autistic. They fixed him by, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anecdotal evidence of a cure is often a misrepresentation of a child's situation. We hear these anecdotes a lot and we bite our tongues. Quote, you are such a saint and I could never do what you are doing. I am not a saint, I am a human being and I find this difficult. And this is God never gives you anything you can't handle. That's not in the Bible, and it's also not true. So we in this community, special needs families, we hear a lot of platitudes. You guys know that. We hear a lot of tried and true sayings that are essentially meaningless, and the problem is that they are really intended to make the speaker feel more comfortable, not us. By telling me that I'm a saint who is stronger than you, you are lessening your own guilt, that I have to deal with something hard like autism and you don't. You chalk it up to the fact that it's because of how strong I am. And if I'm so strong as you say, then you are off the hook for helping me. When you tell me God won't give me anything I can't handle, you are essentially telling me that on the days that I feel really lost and out of control, that it must be my fault. I am not trying hard enough, praying correctly, living my life in whatever way you imagine that I should be. This kind of sentiment falls into what I call toxic positivity culture. When I am given the opportunity to talk to other special needs parents, those of autistic kids or kids with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, any kind of profound challenge, what we commiserate over, besides our insurance nightmares and our sleep deprivation and picky eating, is the really hurtful way that so many people try and convince us that our challenges are just a matter of our bad attitudes. When you try to convince someone that their feelings are invalid, invented, or not related to the reality of their life, that's called gaslighting. I think this applies to anyone, anywhere, going through something hard. When I am shown real, genuine empathy, I feel emboldened and empowered and seen and not alone. When I am told to have a good attitude, no matter what's happening in my life, I then suddenly feel obligated to perform being okay for you and to repress my pain and to be inauthentic with you in the future. There is no real caring in that space, and I am suddenly even more alone. Allow people to be in the dark, get in there with them and hold their hand so they don't feel alone. I promise that is more helpful than standing outside it and shouting into them that the light out here is better. Recently, I attended a suicide prevention talk, which was profound, and when she talked about what not to say to a suicidal person, the first thing she said was do not invalidate their feelings. And I almost burst into tears because I never feel more alone than when I am told that it's just not that bad. But when someone says, wow, that sounds really hard, you're doing a great job. Is there anything that I can do to make it easier? Well, that is like a flashlight in a pitch black tunnel for me. And lastly, if you know a family like ours, if you are a family like ours, raising a child with autism or another developmental disability or medical fragility, listen to them, listen to us when they tell you what they need help with. Asking for help is really hard in our culture, and we equate needing help with weakness. We don't want anyone to know that we're not okay. But often, and I've experienced this so many times as the primary person in our family who reaches out for support, often when we do ask for help, people believe they know better. They put resources and efforts and money in a different direction. I asked for a night of babysitting so I can breathe and maybe spend time with my husband, but you order me a book on autism-specific nutrition. So my need isn't met, despite your good intentions. And also, I made up that example so no family or friends were harmed in the giving of the speech. And I can promise you that people in the family that you want to support really do know what they need better than you do. I can promise you that I know more about what is best for Asher than you do. I may not be a therapist or a medical professional, but I am the boots on the ground, fiercely loving and protective mom. So please listen with open ears and minds. I hope that something I told you today can shed light on our unique kind of family, and I hope you can promote inclusion in your community and expand on how you think of kids like Asher. So thank you for listening to me. I know that was long. Thank you guys for allowing me to do that. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Of course. And
Thank you.
I have to pee. Okay if I go?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Like I said, there's a lot of trading back and forth.
Trading. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you want me to give them?
What? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody who would like my contact information, absolutely.
Absolutely. I
I
can do
love
that.
having friends in this community, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
My turn?
Yes. I don't
And this is
know
the-
why I'm sitting up here. I just feel like.
It's more support, Shauna.
I don't know.
What AMC right now?
Exactly.
Will this
I
be-
thought you were saying.
Available on video so I can watch everyone else talk? Okay, so I can watch it too. Okay. Thank you, and I apologize again. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. We'll see you.
Hey, I'm Kat.
I'll switch.
Most of you actually know me because I am pretty involved in the disabilities community. I work with the special ed PTA, one of the officers, and we do not just the school piece of helping families and kiddos. We do a lot of legislative advocacy. Everything she told you is absolutely true. Montana's in a very poor state on how to help both kids and adults with disabilities around here, and the resources are incredibly limited. And so we do that. I also am on the state's oversight committee for ABLE accounts. If you have not heard about that, that's accounts where you can actually set money aside for a person with a disability without accounting against their means-based testing for government benefits. So I do a lot of that, but my main thing is I am a mom as well, and a wife, and those are my two kiddos. Evie is my autistic, beautiful girl. She has multiple disabilities though, so the primary one is autism, but she also has ADHD and ODD, which is opposition defiant disorder, and she's been diagnosed with. Luckily, we're seeing less and less of that, so that is awesome. And then my son Aki, so Evie is 12, Aki just turned 10, and Aki is technically the typically developing, but also not neurotypical. He was identified as gifted, and so it's amazing how some of those characteristics mimic autism. So I have two non-neurotypical kids at this point. And so my husband and I joke about it as like, great, we cannot produce a typical child, so that's cool. And I also have some fur babies, so I have our dog, Packy, who's a recent addition. We have a guinea pig and 12 chickens. So we have a lot going on. Busy house, fresh eggs, which is, as you heard before, Evie has dietary restrictions as well that we had to identify, and similar, gluten, dairy, processed sugars, high quantities of that are really, really bad. And then store-bought eggs also didn't sit well with her, so this is a great way for us to be able to, for her to be able to eat eggs, is having our own chickens. So these are the kind of weird things you end up doing as a family.
That you never think you'll
That
do.
you never think you'll do. You'll get chickens because those are the only eggs your child can eat. And when we bought our house, it was one of those where we had to consciously think of finding a house, being able to have a space that if for some reason our child can never live on her own, then that will, we'll be able to help her with that. So the house, we ended up for a long time, we thought we were gonna have to build a house, but we ended up finding a house where actually my husband has been for the last 3 years remodeling a separate part of the house to turn it into a one-bedroom apartment. And then that's also for, and there's another thing that happens with families like ours, is we're fortunate because we live here where my mother-in-law lives and my sister-in-law and all that. And so we have family close by who've been so incredibly helpful with our kiddos and with Evie and helping that care. And they've been our primary respite providers for the kiddos' whole lives. But it's getting to the point where now grandma is aging and she's starting to need care as well. So now we're facing this situation where we have an aging grandparent who is likely going to be living in that space before even Evie does. So we had to make it, and she does have health care, so we have to make it handicap accessible and all that to make it work for her. So that's kind of what's been in the works for a few years since we bought the house. And my husband and I, we both work. When the kiddos were younger, and this is another thing that's challenging, and you wouldn't think so, because we live in a modern age, come on. So I've always been the primary breadwinner in the family. I've always been the one with the full-time job, and when Rob could, he was always the one that worked more of the part-time jobs, more of trying to get more of the flexibility in his hours. And it's amazing how employers still just don't get it. And he's perfectly upfront about it every single time, saying, look, these are the hours I can work. I have 2 children, one of them special needs. I'm the secondary breadwinner, not the primary, and I'm the one that's we're supposed to be called, because that's the other thing. Schools tend to still call the mom first. I'm like, and I've had this happen. I'm like, I'm at the Seattle airport. You're not supposed to be calling me. You're supposed to be calling Dad. So things like that are also unique in our family, and for the community to understand that is different. Again, and at this day and age, why is that so hard?
And support that.
And support that. And
So when Dad leaves his job, it's not seen as negligence in the employee workforce, but he's primary.
He's primary. And so luckily now our kiddos are at the age, and Evie has, oh my gosh, progressed. I mean, Shauna's been seeing Evie since she was 3. Evie's now 12, so you do the math. I'm a thinker, but I don't math. So it's been a long, long time, and the progress she's made is amazing. So now both of us are able to work full-time again, and it works out, and we're actually in a very fortunate state where Evie is to the point, and that is very reflective of her typical attitude, that expression right there, that she can be trusted, especially with her brother, to be by themselves for a couple of hours. So I'm fortunate now that I don't have to do the whole grocery store run with the scrape, but I've been there, and Rob's been there. My husband, because being the primary care provider, he's often in the store, and with him the challenge comes in is when she was younger and she was having a meltdown in the middle of the store, and with her the thing that seemed to always help the most is just putting her in a really tight squeeze. Can you imagine the looks?
Because of the sensory. She still loves it.
She
She
still,
loves
like,
to push
she's-
off you, and you're like, oh, she's looking for that sensory.
But a man with a little girl.
But a man with a little girl
Girl.
squeezing her in aisle 12 of Walmart doesn't go over well.
No.
Right.
And so it's
For Dad, therapy.
so his challenges with doing all that has been, the looks and any day I was like, somebody's gonna call the police on me because I'm trying to just calm her. And so that gets really, really challenging. We were also fortunate that we were on a call waiver because Wade's autism, so we had 3 years of very, very intense service. And yes, we've had challenges where Family Outreach, who was our case manager, they didn't always have enough people to provide the services. So we kind of took matters into our own hands, and also with Shauna's help and with reaching out. We actually found our own care providers, and we sent them to Family Outreach. I'm like, okay, hire this person, they're gonna be. And so it did, that did help, but we did have to take a very proactive approach in recruiting them because it wasn't gonna happen otherwise. And those years made an enormous difference in Evie and how she was able to manage her own autism, her own way, and advocate for herself. But I do remember the years of the nonverbal.
Yeah.
Because she started out as
And anger.
and throwing and the self-harm and the other harm, and at the same time this was happening, we had Aki, who's still kind of a baby, and I actually had complications from C-sections after Evie too, but especially after Aki. So my health wasn't the best.
Right.
And in my case, doctors couldn't even figure out what was wrong with me. So when she talked about the night out, I remember the last night out Rob and I spent together was when I was overnight at the hospital a couple of years ago when I had my surgery that finally ended up fixing everything. So that was our last night out together, which, you know, that's, now we can. And it's funny because now we're in this phase where everything's just been kind of falling behind for years and years. And we're finally getting to a point where we're starting to catch up. And so we want to keep that momentum going. And so now we're like, okay, we really need to start thinking about taking time for ourselves because we can finally afford to do so. And we can finally have help, and the kiddos are finally to the point where they don't need 24/7 supervision. Because what you think of, I don't know, toddlers, remember the toddler age where they're not really talking yet, but they're moving and they're going places and they're doing, and they're constantly in everything. And now imagine those toddler years lasting a lot
Till
longer.
middle school.
Till middle
Or
school.
beyond.
Or more, or longer. I know families where they have a 20-year-old and still in the toddler age, and that is incredibly hard on all of the families and everybody that provides care and services on a regular basis, because you're indefinitely looking after a toddler.
Yep.
And a son, so.
Good schooling.
Good schooling.
She was at Irving, she's at SMS now. The progress she's making is pretty amazing, the directed.
Yeah, and the other thing one of the things that I'm most grateful for, because Evie was diagnosed when she was 3, and at that time, my son was 6 months old. I'm grateful that she didn't get diagnosed before I got pregnant with my son, because then I may not have had another child. And that would have been a huge, huge just loss for all of us, including Evie, because that little guy is kind of a natural therapist and has become so, because he is a huge reason why Evie is verbal now, him pushing her. Right now we're in a very interesting stage because developmentally they're kind of the same age. Which is neat in so many ways because they play together and they interact with each other and they're best buddies right now. And my current fear is what happens when he surpasses her.
He gets past her.
He gets past her. And he is smart and and a lot of you didn't know him because he participates in sip shops, because this is hard on him too. Having an older sister, and it is an older sister. And understanding, and he's now realizing that he's at the same level she is in so many different ways. And knowing and anticipating that he's going to surpass her here pretty quickly in many ways. And understanding, though we've never put this on him, starting to understand the potential role he'll always have to be in her life. And
Later life.
So, and when I talk to special needs parents, especially those that have also the quasi-typically developing kids, and running into them, and we're like, hey, how are you, and what's going on? And so we automatically start talking about our special needs kiddos, and then I've tried to make a real conscious effort to then bring up, and what about the other child?
Right.
because that tends to kind of slightly be forgotten. And yes, those other kiddos are there too, and they have challenges too. And when it comes to having somebody provide respite care or any care, so respite care can look like a very different way. And it's funny because it's not just taking care of my kid, my family when I'm not there. Sometimes respite care is you're there, you're the one engaged, so I can take a nap, okay? It may not just mean me leaving the house. And one of the things that has always driven me nuts when people offer to help is they say, how can I help? And I tell them, I was like, how about I do this instead? No, you asked how you can help. I'm telling you how you can help. Don't come up with something else, okay?
Right.
So that was one of the things that always drove me nuts, is people asking and then saying, how about something else? And I'm like, no, I don't want something else.
This is what I need.
This is what I need. And so getting that. So sometimes it's that. And also with respite, I just wanted to do a few things. Or tell you guys a few things, like red flags that go off in my head when I'm a mom and looking for someone to care for any of my, not just my non-typical one, but the typical one as well. And what I always tell moms when they go to school, I am the expert on my child. You guys may be the expert on other areas of education, of providing certain therapies, of all that, but I as a parent, and of course Rob too, we're the experts on our own children. So that is very important for everybody to understand that is what it is, and that's what parents' role is in so many ways. And then the other thing is, if I'm talking to you to help provide care for my child, and you have no questions for me, there is no way I cover everything. So that is an instant red flag in my head if you have no questions after we've talked, after we've met, and things like don't feel insulted if I say, I'm just gonna hang out and watch interaction with my kiddo and you for a while before I leave. Don't take it as an insult.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure that this is a good thing, because we've had, and it was when we were receiving services, we've had family outreach come to us like, we have this awesome new provider, and you know, and we'd like you to, you know, this person to start providing care. And they started, and we're like, and I met them, I'm like, ooh. And then I watched the interaction, and I went, this is not gonna work for us. It is not gonna work for us. And that is something that, again, it's not intended as an insult. It's just certain personalities don't match, don't click, it just doesn't work out. You may be great with another child or another person. You can't be great with every single one.
Right.
So that's it. And I think I covered everything,
That's good.
but yeah, and I know she said it doesn't necessarily get better. It's all a matter of perspective. It always changes.
And maturation, growing older.
And yeah,
Getting
we're
older.
getting older. And
So I
the
wanted a
thing is-
pediatric and a middle and.
in the middle. So it did get better in a lot of respects for us, and not just with maturity, but all the intervention. And but it also changes. The challenges change. It's just a constant. And, but it's great, and it's amazing, and being able to celebrate the tiny things, the things that I've even was like I take for granted with my son. It's a huge thing for Evie, and it's
Tell
just
about the
fun.
hood.
Oh, the hood. So she's wearing the hood. This was the beginning of the school year when we took this picture.
This year.
This year. So this was September,
12th.
first day of school. Which was challenging in many ways. Poor kid got her period the first day of school. So
Sensory she always
was
needs.
muted. So that hood, and she always has had noise canceling headphones too, but the hood was huge.
Want me to tell what happened?
Yes, you tell me.
So it's session with me, she says, we talked about confidence today in school. And I said, well, your hood doesn't make you look very confident. I just laid it out who I could, because just think about a relationship from 3 to 12. if that's what you're trying to portray with this, I don't know that the hood's getting it done. Let me take a picture, I'll show it to you, and then you tell me if that looks confident. It kind of looks like you're hiding sometimes. Is there another way we could block the sound if you're used to the feeling? You know this, because you worked with her when she was little. Because you can block the sound. She had a pink one, black one. Meantime, family is looking everywhere for another hooded version of these coats. I think I find them. No, they're not right. They're not soft enough. You know, we go through the whole internet to try to find. And so.
And I'm washing it.
Oh, she's washing every other day because it's dirty, and she will not wear it. This is the difference with her daughter, is I was able to say, what was that lesson on confidence? I didn't hit it as bluntly as I told you. Let's talk about what a confident person looks like. Does your hood make you confident or not confident, do you think? Next day, it was off and has been off since.
And she's been able to tolerate it.
Welcome to autism. And sometimes it's just telling them that, or saying something, or tag teaming. Immediately I said, okay, this is what I did. Like, I need you to back me up. Like, this is where we're at.
And we did
But-
it, and the nice thing is that her teacher also did the same thing.
Called the
So she
teacher,
was-
told her.
So it was the consistency on
Right.
everywhere she went, and yes, and her hood has been down. She does like wear it in the mornings when it's cold in the morning, because
Sure.
she doesn't like wearing a hat. But it really is just a weather thing, and then she takes it off, and lo and behold, I mean, she's making new friends at school, and she's talking, or she's in the cafeteria having lunch.
Talking about brushing the hair now.
No, it's
With the
brushing.
hood uncovered.
And she does have a difficult hair. It's curly and it's up, and you remember.
Right.
So,
But that's just an example of both autism and how kind of cut and dry it can be. And a therapeutic relationship with someone, so you can actually say that and not do more damage or stress and anxiety. Because she's also a kid that would worry about that if you don't do it the right way. Does that make sense? Like, oh gosh, I should have it down, but I don't right now. And, all of those, which we'll talk about the rest of today and everything. But that's a little example, and I couldn't believe that she understood. I mean, the whole concept of confidence, she understood and what it meant, and I was so thrilled out of my mind. That's my drug personally, that she got that and knew what that was, and I could equate it to body language and how that makes you look. Was an amazing lesson for her. So she's really doing well. We're excited about where she's at. Yep.
so
Thank you. Fun little.
Well, I'm at the other end. My son is 29 years old, and at Christmas, I'm going to compliment a lot of things that has been said already, because I've been there, but in a very different way, because my son does not have autism. He was developing normally at 15 months of age. He had some kind of infectious illness that caused an encephalitis-like illness that was never properly diagnosed. Nobody knows what it was that got him. It caused some kind of brain damage, and so we went from having a kid who was on his way to, was climbing all over the place and beginning to talk and doing all kinds of things, to a child who couldn't suck. And I was dropping liquid into his mouth from a dropper. So that was what got us on this path. But things do change. They change. It's really rough in the beginning, for sure, because you're trying to sort it out, especially when you don't have a diagnosis. You can't, it's very difficult. We were lucky. Whatever neurological damage went on with Ty did not cause him to become a cranky, not pleasant individual. He is very, very sweet and loving. And in fact, at the holidays, my daughter was visiting with her kids, so my grandkids, who are now surpassing my son. She said, we were watching Elf. You all know the movie Elf with
Will
Ferrell. My daughter says, he reminds me of Ty.
Oh.
And it's true. Sorry.
No.
So anyway, he doesn't have autism. There were no behavioral issues. He wasn't potty trained until he was in high school. Okay, we're fine until he's, about, I don't know, late elementary school. We could still get high school students maybe that could deal with that. But then there's no more of that. So then you run into problems. Then you get to at the adult years where there's no more school.
Right.
You've got 8 hours a day.
Funding.
There's no funding. It takes a while to get a DD waiver. I don't know how it happened. We got a DD waiver 2 years after Ty graduated from high school. And the only thing I can figure out is that somehow he had gotten put on that list early on and we didn't even realize it. And that's how he came to the top of the list. But for most people that I know, they moved into the state late and they're on that list late and they're gonna take forever to get a DD waiver. So we have a DD waiver, which is very, very important if you have a kid with special needs, because that gives you all kinds of support. So it gives you money. But just because you have the money doesn't necessarily mean, as was pointed out before, that you can find the people to provide the services that you need. All the agencies in town here are struggling. REACH can't keep its staff up where it needs to be. So everything is very difficult for these adults. So here we've got we're in a pretty good place now. Ty's very independent. He lives in an apartment, he lives in a house with 2 other young men, one of whom is on the autism spectrum. One is not and has other developmental issues that I think have also never been diagnosed. We have a young man this year who's living in the house with him. He's the house manager. He's a college student. He's been super. His sister was our first house manager. She was with us for a year, went off to medical school, and now we have her brother who's just been great. But that's a limited interaction, and both my husband and I are now retired. So we are empty nesters, but it's very difficult to go anywhere. And he has a 94-year-old father in New Jersey. I have a 92-year-old mother in Florida. We're doing this to check in on them and every time we do that, we have to make arrangements for Ty while we're gone. And then if we want to do anything, we're supposed to be able to travel now. Woohoo!
Yeah.
Yeah, even to go see our grandkids. Yeah, it's very, and my daughter, I think she's, kind of bothered that we just aren't flipping over to, Minneapolis to go visit her. It's a really easy flight, right? Well, yeah, but I have to make, these arrangements, So the need for respite goes on and on and on for many of these folks. I know families who have a 40-year-old who extremely independent, works, but doesn't like to be alone. And so for them to travel, they have to have somebody come in and be in the house with their daughter. So, it's not just behavioral issues, it's just the fact that they don't always have the judgment that they need to be totally independent, and they need somebody checking on them or making sure things happen and things like that. So I encourage whoever ends up in this respite pool to think not only about those little kids that are so cute and wonderful but have behavioral issues, but also to think about those adults who also need some help. And also you have to be careful with them as well because they're adults and they let you know. And they do not want to be bossed around. And the one time that Ty will, and Shauna knows this, the times that Ty loses it is when he's getting pushed beyond his point. And then boy does he go, lizard. And it's not pretty, yeah. And I don't know that you've ever seen that, Maggie, but
You'd be shocked to
I
see
get
it.
the good.
you get the good time, yeah.
Usually from roommates telling him what to do, or
Yeah.
someone else really kind of getting
Yeah,
him. And he just
usually his father, yeah.
Yeah, Dad can do it.
But, anyway, so there's a whole spectrum is the point I want to make. There's a whole spectrum of individuals out there who need help at various stages in their lives and whose parents need that break at various stages in their lives. And I turned 72 this year, so I'm looking at I'm close to that future. I've seen what the decade of the 80s, I talk about the decade of the 80s. That's the decade where everything seems to go down the tubes. I'm 8 years away from the decade of the 80s. And so it's gonna continue on into the future. And so that's what I wanna put out there, that this is not just about those little kids with behavioral issues. This is about a whole spectrum of individuals and their families who need that support. So that's my spiel.
Nice. You guys need a little potty break, or how are we doing that way? We can sign to each other, or are you feeling okay with rolling? Yep, just take just a 5-minute walkabout, you think? Just to...
Yeah, and if you need to get more tea.
Oh, the other thing I was gonna say, it's not officially on record right now, but kind of. I just got an email from Family Outreach that said there's not one group home placement open in this state.
In the whole state?
In the whole state, right? Not in Sydney where I grew up, and we have 5 group homes, not anywhere right now.
Yeah.
Well,
Not
there's
one.
still 12 adults at Boulder, you knew.
Oh, I know.